everyone. Hi, I'm Paul. My name's Paul Redmayne. I'm here in Hong Kong, so it's a little bit late for me. It's 12:30 in the morning, so we're 13 hours ahead of you guys in New York. Shaun is in London, so I think it's 4:30 p.m. for him. So we're spanning the globe. As you said, yeah. So I'm head of private sales for Phillips. Flawless is the name of our private sales division. My background's actually retail. So I started at Cartier in London in 1997, and I did over 20 years in retail, and then hopped across to auction in 2017 here in Hong Kong. I lived in Paris for 7 years. I'm from London, as you can hear. I lived in Paris for 7 years. I worked at Harry Winston. I worked for LVMH jeweler Fred. Moved back to London, worked at Moussaieff, moved out to Hong Kong in 2012. So I've been here 9 years, almost 9 years. And I met Shaun. I think we were introduced. We were trying to think place when it was the other day. Probably about 2008, 2009. So we were introduced in London. When I was there, when we were both there, and then obviously I followed his career as an observer, and then latterly we managed to get him to do this project with us at Phillips. So super exciting, and he's such a talent, and he's such a great speaker as well. He's so passionate, he's so enthusiastic, and it's always a pleasure I could sit and listen to him for hours.
Well, on that note of the collaboration, and while we wait for Shaun, I'm just going to bring up the video about the Phillips collaboration for people to enjoy. Just give me a hot second.
To me, the core purpose of jewelry is to adorn ourselves, to portray a reflection of who we are or who we want to be. I've been making jewelry for 36 years, and the house is now celebrating 21 years, and I wanted to look back on my journey from being a classical trained goldsmith to my time with Alexander McQueen, creating avant-garde pieces for the runways of Paris. The collection is very diverse in silhouette, in aesthetic, in technique, with a thread which is so iconically mine, which is a very simple form, but a very powerful statement. You have a diversity of materials, strong silhouettes created by delicate feathers, formidable cups created with enamel and diamonds, fine lines that look like slithers of metal. There is a balance to be struck between ferocity and vulnerability. And these are the details, I think, which make my work very powerful.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. What an exciting collaboration. I think we're just going to be joined by Shaun very shortly. Here he is now. Exciting times. Time zones, as you said, we're coming in from around the world, so coordinating time zones is quite the task. Okay. Let me just bring him up here. Shaun, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Oh my God, amazing. Welcome, welcome. Okay, great. Well,
oh, sorry, I'm late.
No apology necessary. We were just kicking off, showing people the Phillips video, and we're ready to start this wonderful conversation. I've already introduced you, so we're ready to go, and I'm going to hand over to Paul, and thanks both for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, Shaun. How are
Hi,
you?
Paul. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Right. Well, let's get going. So we're just going to have a little chat. So we'll start off. I've just given a quick background to me and to Phillips and what we're doing. I touched on the fact that we're doing this collaboration together, we've just seen the video of the pieces. So let's hear in your words about how your journey started. That's always a fascinating one, and then feed that through just up to Phillips, and then we'll come to the one of the major themes. We'll come to that separately. So so just talk about your journey and Phillips and how the Phillips collaboration came about initially.
Okay, well, first and foremost, sorry that I was late. Got my timings wrong there, but I'm here now, thank God. It's good to see you. And Alex, thank you for the introduction. So everybody's seen the Phillips film already. So they've seen the works that we have created together and that we've curated. I think for me, the Phillips collaboration and the partnership has been a really beautiful, reflective journey for me, really, because we started talking, Paul, gosh, about 2 years ago, wasn't it, really? Or about a year and a half ago, I think. And I think for me, how that all came about really was the very beginning of the book. So, you know, I was about so that's where it really began. So really about 2.5 years ago, I was approached by ACC Art Books to publish my book of my life's works to date. And that's been a really beautiful experience to reflect back on the past, all my wonderful collaborations, the history of my life, from my heritage, from my very classical training in Hatton Garden, starting that at a very young age of 15. And then working a 7-year apprenticeship, you know, working for an atelier that crafted jewels for royal families all over the world, very high, fine jewelry. And then having that foundation, that solid classical foundation in goldsmithing, and then meeting Alexander McQueen when I was 22, and working with him for 20 years and creating all those avant-garde pieces that we did for the catwalks in Paris and London, and for Givenchy for couture and for his brand, McQueen. Then to my works, which are a fusion of both of those worlds, my classical training, fused with the avant-garde approach to design that I learned with Alexander and from Alexander McQueen, who I call Lee. All his friends called him Lee because his name was Lee Alexander McQueen, and he kind of dropped the Lee for the brand because Alexander sounded more grand. And Isabella Blow, actually a very good friend of all of ours, always used to call him Alexander the Great. So Alexander McQueen was very fitting for his brand, I would say. So the book was kind of like all of those three facets, and to bring all of those three facets of my life together, the heritage, the McQueen, the fashion, and then the fusion of those to what is my work today, which is modern classics, which is a fusion of fine craftsmanship, modern approach to design, which I like to call the modern classics. It's jewelry, it's fine, refined jewelry, which is timeless for the modern woman, really. And
this is what I find so sorry, I'll just jump in, Sean. This is what I find so fascinating about your journey, is that you are a classically trained goldsmith. You have done the whole long apprenticeship, all the patience and just the diligence it takes to do that. And then with the firm with which you did the apprenticeship, you were with them, what, 13 years in total? Before you set off and you launched on your own. I mean, the patience is just, it's so, and it was such a traditional training as well. You know, the breadth with which you covered the industry from the inside, in such a traditional way, and yet the pieces that must have been itching to come out of you when you're doing all of this have suddenly have just come out, and you can see the tradition, but it's the craftsmanship. It's for me, your pieces, it's the craftsmanship that just sets them sets them apart. It's the attention, and obviously, you know, I've known you for what, 10 plus years now, but working with you now on this project for Phillips, it's the attention to detail, which is just, it's so rare. And you see it in the pieces. You see it in the pieces. It's really, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. What a lovely thing to say, Paul. And it's kind of, I think, for me, I think to kind of, when I think about what we're doing here as well, what we're doing with Phillips and what I've created and what we're creating, because what we're seeing now is really only like the beginning, isn't it? It's the first 12 pieces, and there's going to be 21 pieces in total. Is my ambition and my vision has always been, if you can imagine, when I was 15 years old, I started an apprenticeship in Hatton Garden for a very fine classical, as I said earlier, fine classical goldsmith who made jewelry for prestigious Bond Streets and all these wonderful people, but it was very classic and refined and traditional and beautiful. And I always, when I first started making jewelry, there was a romance to it that was so therapeutic for me. It took me on a fantasy. It took me somewhere magical when I make. And for me,
and this was from what age? This was from the beginning, from when you were doing the apprenticeship?
This was from 15, when I sat on the bench and my two masters started training me. By the age of 18, I was making tiaras for Aspreys. I absorbed it so quickly. But I got so consumed by the making. I loved the making, and I would just get into the romance of it and the detail, and it's very therapeutic for me. It's like painting. And there was this magic in the craft for me. But then when I started working with Alexander McQueen when I was 22, he opened me up to the possibilities of being able to design, and the freedom, a really beautiful creative freedom to do anything I wanted. You know, there was no constraints with McQueen. Everything, the creative possibilities were endless. So I'd come from a very classical training. I had this foundation of skill and magic of craft, which I loved. But then when I started working with McQueen, he opened me up to this other magic and this other fantasy of design, which I had never had the opportunity of doing that before, because I was very restricted. The company I worked for, we would get, you know, gouache paintings from the Bond Street stores, and we would have to make those pieces. I couldn't change the design or input my element, what I thought would make a modern design, because we were the goldsmiths, we were the craftsmen. But then when I started working with McQueen, there was this freedom. I could design jewelry that I felt was reflective of my generation and who we are, and what I thought the energy of that woman was in the 90s. Not like, for the woman I was making jewelry before, was more of a woman of the 70s, the 80s. Do you know what I mean? It was that very classical, grand, beautiful, fine high-end jewelry. But for me, there was an edge in the 90s, and I was part of that with McQueen, and I wanted my jewelry to reflect that. So to get back to the point of what I'm doing with you guys, jewelry has always been, fine jewelry has always been my passion. And I was very restricted when I was younger to be able to apply my design to fine jewelry. And when I first started my business, I worked in silver, and I explored my identity, and I was very brave with my style and my volume and the scale of the work. But my mission was always to create avant-garde fine jewelry that would push the boundaries and break the mold a little bit from that generation to this generation. So with the pieces we've made together, fundamentally, there is the craft. You know, there is the craft that I was taught, that is there in the pieces, because I believe whether jewelry should be a catwalk piece of jewelry or whether it's a pair of diamond earrings, the craft should be exactly the same, the refinement, the longevity, the execution. But working with yourselves gives me a platform to input that fine craftsmanship, but input avant-garde design in fine high jewelry, and push those boundaries and bring that silhouette and that energy that I created with McQueen on the catwalk, all of the 90s and the thousands, bring that to fine jewelry, because there's a new woman today. There is the classical, beautiful diamond chandeliers that have been made by all of those beautiful, prestigious houses for many years, and that style of work. But now there is that is our mothers and that is our grandmothers. There is a new woman who wants to wear fine jewelry that matches her McQueen or her Rick Owens or her, you know what I mean, the style, the fashion.
And this is the thing. You were so ahead of the curve to identify that, and I find it. I love the way you talk about jewelry. You don't talk about it, even though your background is jewelry. You talk about jewelry very much in a couture, in a fashion world parlance, vernacular. You surf the waves of a fashion house, and you surf the waves of a fashion house couture style and of jewelry. And I think you occupy this space that very, very few people do occupy. And I think it's a space now that a lot of people would want to occupy, and a lot of brands, a lot of houses are trying to occupy. But you have the authenticity, and because of the relationship with McQueen, and because I don't know, I've thought, is it because McQueen was not from a jewelry background, so he was able to look with such fresh eyes and just think, well, this is how it should be done, or this is why is there a limit? Because obviously he was used to creating pieces and creating clothes and creating silhouettes from all types of material. He wasn't constrained by any material. Whereas if you look at our industry is very conservative, and it's very anti-risk taking, and it's very it's like sort of elephants walking down a path. They tend to, the foot goes one in front of the other, and there aren't too many elephants. They look and make sure they're there, but there's a huge, I always say, there's a huge jungle. Why are we all walking down this path? Why don't we go off-piste? And you've definitely gone off-piste and done it, and you've claimed your part of the jungle.
Do you know what? That's a lovely story, actually, to look at it like that. I think what was really beautiful, and what I'm really grateful for, and I'm always grateful for, is the freedom that I had when I met McQueen, and him too when he met me, with our two disciplines. So Lee came from a very classical training like me, Savile Row, fine tailoring. He learned the very traditional way, as did I, in Hatton Garden. He did a long apprenticeship, I did a long apprenticeship. And we both respected our heritage, our craft, where we came from. And we wanted to, I can speak for myself and for Lee as well, we wanted to break the rules, and we wanted to change. We wanted to create something new, but carry forward our craft and execution. We all respected that truly, but we wanted to break the rules and be innovative. And I think what was lovely about me and Lee was we were both the same age. We were 22 when we met. I'd just finished my 7-year apprenticeship. He'd just done his MA at Central St Martin's. He'd started doing a few shows off schedule. So he was doing a few of his own radical shows. And then he asked me to start working with him in 92. No, sorry, we met in 92, 94. And it was like I had come from a very classical, restricted world in jewelry. As you said, I was one of those elephants walking down the path, holding on to the tail of another. And he had already broken the path. You know, he came from that world of Savile Row, but he had already explored fashion in many different ways and wanted to change. And when he introduced me to his world, because I knew nothing about fashion, I will be totally honest, I used to go and meet him. We were friends. We met through a friend. My friend was on the same MA course as him in Central St Martin's. So I used to go down to Central St Martin's of an evening after work and meet my friend Simon for a drink. And Lee would come along, and we all just became mates. So, but when you know, we were 22-year-olds, we just ran around Soho getting drunk. That's what we did, you know. But when I used to go to St Martin's when I was 22 years old, and we're talking old central St Martin's down on Tottenham Court Road, where the walls were covered in paint, the floor had years of paint on. It was a hub of creativity. You could just see it on the floors and the walls. But I used to go in there and think, these guys are crazy. You know, they were like creating things out of paper and plastic and God knows what. And I just didn't understand fashion at all at that time. So when Lee opened the door to me and brought me into the fashion world and asked me to work with him, I was opened up to pattern cutting and structure and how fabrics and how you could apply different things to fabrics and what you could do with fabric and fuse leather and fabric and lace and leather. And I found it fascinating technically because I'm a technician to a degree, do you know what I mean? But in a different medium.
Because the apprentice, so maybe now's a good time to just talk about the apprenticeship, about how you start with one metal and you work in one metal and then you graduate to the next metal and the next metal. So that's just touch, maybe give a few sentences just about the apprenticeship that you did for the goldsmith. So you don't start with the gold, do you? You start with...
No, you start with, so when I first started my apprenticeship, you're learning. So you've got to learn the tools, you've got to learn the skill, how to use the tools. So you start on copper really. So you're given copper to work with because it's an inexpensive metal and you start forming and filing and sawing copper. Then once your skill develops, you go up to silver. And then you start soldering and learning how solders flow and joining and fusing the metals together and cutting and piercing, etc. And then when your skills progress, you go to gold and then finally platinum. And normally in my atelier where I was training, the gap from silver to gold was normally about 2 years or 2.5 years before you'd work on silver for a long time. And then you would go on to gold. Myself, I was on gold within 6 months. I learned very, very quickly. And
was that your hunger? You wanted to graduate onto gold, or was that it just came naturally and it was just the speed that you worked at? And
I think it came naturally because I went to a very academic school that didn't really cater for the creatives, and I'm one of a creative mind, and I have a skill in my hands, and you know, and I just embraced the craft and loved it and fell in love with it, and I just seemed to be really good at it. And I think once I started crafting, to be totally honest, I was quite a wild child. I was very wild, and it obviously shows in my work, but I was quite wild and restless all of my childhood and my early teens. Absolutely. My parents would say I was adorable, but an absolute nightmare. But because I wasn't absorbing, I wasn't creating, I hadn't found what I loved, and I went to an academic school, and I wasn't getting it. I was a bright kid, but I just wasn't getting the academic. I just wasn't interested. I could do it, but I just wasn't interested. So when craft was put in front of me and making, I jumped on it, and I just absorbed it. And when I turned up for my apprenticeship, they could see I was a bit wild, you know. When they took me on as an apprentice, I never forget, they looked at me and they could see I was a bit of a rebel, just the way I was dressed and my fashion and my piercings and God knows what. And they were very strict. But they saw my work, they saw my college work, and they saw something. They could see that I had a skill, and they were very strict. And they said, you start at 8, you finish at 6. You don't speak unless you're spoken to. You make the teas for us, you get our lunch, you sweep the floor for gold and stones in the morning, and you sweep the floor for gold and stones in the evening. And it was really, really strict. But because it was a strict training and a strict apprenticeship, I absorbed it, and I behaved. I wasn't rebellious.
And now the benefit of that is you have such that breadth, that vision of the whole industry, the whole design process, the whole manufacture. You know what's possible, you know what's not, you know what could be done, you know. And for me that's what really shows, because you get a lot of designers who say, oh right, well let's do this, but because they haven't sat at the bench and because they haven't set the stones and they haven't done this, it plays out, and you can see it in their work. Whereas with yours, you can see that it comes from this fastidious attention to detail, which just it carries through everything. And I think it was Joanna Hardy who said about the craftsmanship, and she said, it's a fantastic quote she said in the podcast that we've got on the Phillips website, which is a great chat. So for everyone on the call now, if you want 20 minutes very well spent, just listen to Joanna Hardy and Shaun on the Phillips website. It's a segment called Verso. And Joanna says about your pieces, and says that you just had this knack of just making things, and it was just your attention to detail was amazing. And if you look at pieces, some antique pieces are absolute rubbish, and some modern pieces are absolute rubbish. And she said it's the craftsmanship which sets things apart. And she says not because it's an old piece, just because it's old doesn't mean it's good. And she said, I think her exact words were, you see some absolute horrors that are old, and you see some horrors that are modern. And she said it's the difference is the craftsmanship, and it's exactly that. It's exactly that. And we see it, in the auction world. We see so many pieces, old, new, vintage, modern, antique, everything coming through, and everything in between. And you start seeing, and it's the differentiator in all of this is the craftsmanship, and it's that attention to detail. Little things. Is the gold, is it piqué? Can you, if you loop the gold, what is the quality of the gold down there? And the finishing, and it's the finishing in the places where you don't need to have finishing. And I've always admired the attention to detail you put on pairs of earrings, for example, and you'll make the earrings beautiful at the back, because they're going to be viewed from the back as well. And it's that, and you've just got that, it's that aesthetic, and it's that attention to detail for the aesthetic, which is what really sets you apart.
Well, I think, my master always taught me that a piece of jewelry should look just as good from the back as it does from the front. And if you look at antique jewelry, good antique jewelry, it's the back of it's beautiful, like the back holing, the fine work, even all the mourning jewelry of the Victorians, like all the work and the doublé, everything at the back is so beautiful. And there's normally engraved and enameled messaging on the back. So the workmanship that goes on the back is just as important as it is on the front. So I was taught that, and I'm so glad that I had that training, very thorough training, because it paid dividends in so many ways. Not only was it a tool for me to craft beautiful work, but it was a tool that then later on allowed me to create and be innovative and open-minded with the things that I needed to make for McQueen. And it's so funny you touch on the detailing, because that's what made Lee want to work with me. So when he came up to my atelier one day, when he was allowed in, when my masters had gone home, and I kind of told him to come and wait for me, he'd never been in before, and I was working on a tiara. I was making a diamond tiara. It hadn't been set yet, but it was all in components. But there were parts of the tiara where it's worn as a tiara, but you would take it off the framework. It could be worn as a necklace, and you unscrew the centerpiece to be worn as a brooch. And all the fittings, I was making all the fittings and little screw fittings for those components, so this piece could be so versatile. And Lee was blown away by this piece. He was like, is this what you make? And I said, well, yeah, we've been friends for 2 years. I've told you I'm a jeweler. What do you think I make? And he didn't seem to get it. And he said, wow. And I showed him how it screws together, and the tiara goes on the framework for the headdress. And he was blown away. And I think that's where he realized my attention to detail and my skill. And going back to what we talked about, our worlds, he then asked me to work for him. I was very daunted at first, because I was a classically trained goldsmith, and I said, I don't understand how we're going to make diamond pieces for your shows. And he was like, no, we're working gold, brass and aluminium and feathers. And I was like, this guy's crazy. Do you know what I mean? I work in gold and platinum and emeralds and diamonds, etc. But he changed my life for that moment, because he said, I said, look what you do. He said, Shaun, if you just apply those skills to any medium or material, you can make anything. And it was that moment that I realized, and I wanted to design my own pieces, and I had never been allowed to where I worked. And I said, come on, yeah, let's do this. This will be fun. And he'd just been 2 years beginning, and it was fun. We did it for passion. But what happened, which was brilliant, which I look back on now, and I didn't realize at the time, obviously, because we were 24 years old, you know, we were just driving along on passion and ambition and excitement, and we were allowed to change things. We both had a tool and a skill, and we loved that, and we had it, we were armed, but then we had the courage and the daringness and the fearfulness to then break the rules, you know. As Lee always used to say, you've got to know how to construct something before you can deconstruct it.
Deconstruct, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we did. But when he introduced me to his world, I was fascinated by all the technical. I was in awe, really. I'd walk around the studio and see all the seamstresses and people making things, and it's my craft is my world, and I'd be fascinated, as would Lee when he came to my workshop then, because we opened, our two worlds opened, and then he would come to my workshop, and so would some of his team, and see me melting gold and melting silver and soldering and filing and joining and settings, gemstones. So it got his imagination going. So when I would be in their studio, I would see them dressing a fit model and seeing how Lee's silhouette would change her form or change her silhouette. And that then inspired me to think, wow, if I made a piece of jewelry, instead of it hanging from the ear, I'll cuff it around the ear to change the form of the head. Or, you know, it just fed what I could do with jewelry. And then when he came to my atelier, he could see then how metalwork could be incorporated into his fashion. So over years of working together, where in the beginning I kind of accessorized his show, you know, I made headdresses and earrings and bracelets and, you know, big scale pieces. We evolved and we grew together, and I went from them making corsets and silver, you know, aluminium skeleton corsets and aluminium coiled corsets. But what was interesting is our worlds fused. It got to a point in several shows where you didn't know what was the accessory and what was the garment, because they became one. You know, the girl was half metal and half fabric. Do you know what I mean?
Well, let's watch, because we've got the McQueen clip. So let's. It seems like a good time now to put the McQueen clip in. Here we go.
So that's my kind of silhouette. That is the iconic silhouette of the house. This beautiful refined tusk. So these were all silver pieces. This was a silver electroformed shoulder piece. I went from making headdresses from millinery for everything really, from the head. So this was the nest and the eagle skull headdress. And these were all set with semi-precious stones. These were really beautiful pieces of jewelry. Each egg had over 900 stones pave set into them. This was the aluminium yashmak. This is a beautiful, stunning, very delicate piece. Up close, the detailing of it is so delicate, but yet from afar, it's like armor and empowering. We loved that balance of creating something that was actually quite strong and powerful, but when one's close up to it, it was actually quite delicate and refined.
But that's your theme. That's your theme, though, and it's that dichotomy and it's that duality that is always. It's the strength and the weakness and the protection and it's everything. You see these very aggressive-looking spike quills that could be a protector, but they could be an attacker as well. They could be a weapon, or they could be an element of defense too. Yeah,
it's like these are like the fan feather earrings.
Porcupine,
porcupine. They're very delicate, but yet strong and powerful. I think for me, there's such a vulnerability and ferocity in all of us, and I like to bring that out in my work. I like to provoke and inspire and touch on emotions, all the emotions that we have. And obviously nature is a massive inspiration for me because of its fragility and its strength. And
And why is that? Why, growing up in London, you know, you didn't grow up in the country, you're in central London. And why do you think nature is so dominant a theme and has been?
God, that's a really good question. And do you know what? I've only shared this recently, and it kind of dawned on me. So obviously, and I don't know if this is where it came from, but it actually could. So from a very young age, I was an only child, and I was always in my garden, always digging up my garden, looking for old artifacts and rummaging around in nature and all that, all fine and good. That was, you can imagine my poor parents, they're just trying to design a garden. I was just constantly digging it up, and yeah, as I said earlier, nightmare. But my next door, this only dawned on me literally about 2 months ago. Now, my next door neighbour, to where my mother and father still live where I grew up, and they have a beautiful Victorian house in Finsbury Park, in North London. And we moved into that house when I was 5, and they're still there. And the neighbours are still there. Well, the lady who lived next door, sadly, she passed away. God, when did Kay pass away? She passed away about 4 years ago, maybe. But the family still live there. The family still have the house, as the house is next door. And I always used to go into the house next door when I was a very young child, and was friends with all the neighbours. You know, my family are all Irish, and we all like lived on the street, and my neighbours were Irish, and we were all like a community. It was lovely. And I would always go in and out of the houses, either side, all up the street. And I'd always go into the house next door. Now, I was always in that house seeing Kay and her family. Now, I went back into that house only a couple of months ago to see them. I hadn't seen them for years, and I'd seen them at events and weddings and things like that, but I'd never been in the house for many, many years. And I went back in the house 2 months ago, and it was the first time I'd been back in the house for maybe 15 years. And as I walked into the hallway, it hit me. On the wall, they have a stag. This beautiful stag head. You know, the old days in the 70s,
yeah.
60s, people had the stags and things like that. And they've got this stag, and it must be like a 14-point stag horn. It's massive. It's beautiful. I mean, it's not the thing I would do now, like have a stag head on my head or on my wall, but you know, it's not the kind of done thing now, but this is a very old thing. Anyway, it's very powerful. You walk into the hallway, it's an old Victorian hallway, tall ceilings, there's this stag there, and it's so empowering. And I walked into the hallway 2 months ago, and I looked up at this stag, of which I used to stare at my whole childhood. I would imagine little me, I'm little already. So when I was 5, I was tiny. And I would walk into that hallway and stare. I would just look up at this stag in just wonder. And I walked into the hallway the other day, and I saw it, and it dawned on me, and I thought,
the tusk.
The tusks. I don't know whether subconsciously, as a child, it has to. There's so many, as I'm getting older, all these different things are put in front of me, and I thought, oh my God, is that where it comes from? Because one of the first things I ever made McQueen was, I made him these, for the Highland Rape show, he asked me to make loads of silver handmade Victorian fob watch chains. So he ripped them all through the clothes and pulled them to different directions and stuff like that. But the second show, The Hunger, I made him a pair of, well, not a pair, it was a silver stag horn, literally, still a silver stag horn that attached to the front of the skirt. And from that, I took the tusks, and then I made the tusk earring. And that whole show was about the tusk, the stag horn and the tusk. And it was from there that my signature grew, and this element of nature, this connection to the fragility and the refinement of nature, but its power. And it only dawned on me 2 months ago. And I used to wonder, where did the point come from? Where did the tusk come from? You know, Joey.
Yeah, because
Joe
there
Hardy,
has to be this. Yeah, there has to be the starting point for it, right?
Yeah,
there has to be some moment where you can trace it back to.
Well, there is another time that I thought it was. Pardon me. I Joanna Hardy, when she interviewed me for my book, you know, Joanna wrote the first chapter of the book. When she interviewed me for the book, I told her, she said, talk to me about your childhood. And we had loads of meetings, and I would just talk about my childhood. She wanted to understand where it came from. Where did this nature come from? Where did this fragility, where did this aesthetic that's very delicate and refined, but very powerful and very empowering come from? And I was quite a wild child and a little bit lost, admittedly. And, you know, I was small and I was bullied when I was young. So I came from this, I needed this protection. But one thing she did pick up on, which was really interesting, when I was a young boy, I used to watch my mother put her makeup on. I would follow her around like a lamb, you know, and watch her. And then I'd watch her put makeup on. And she used to put mascara on and separate her eyelashes with a needle, you know, because it was like a real concentrated procedure. And I'd watch with fascination her with this needle so close to her eye, you know.
One slip.
All that juxtaposition of something so delicate and fine, yet so dangerous. Yeah. And Joey was like, I wonder whether that's where it came from, Shaun, whether it was that juxtaposition of watching your mother with a needle near her eye that was this element of danger for beauty's sake. You know, she was making herself look, and she was she still is very glamorous. And I would watch her adorn herself of an evening getting ready, the whole process from hair to makeup. And the final thing would be her jewelry. You know, the final touch she'd put on her jewelry, and she'd say, what do you think? And it all became part of my psyche or my subconscious. And it's interesting, as I get older, I'm remembering more, strangely enough, and you think one would forget more, but I'm actually remembering, you know, I'm the reverse.
Lucky you.
I know, lucky me, thank God. I'm going the other way, and I'm remembering. And for me, there is in my work, and I saw it in Lee's work as well. I think that's why me and Lee were so attached and so in tune, because we were unspoken. We had the same energy and the same childhood. We had the same upbringing. We were craftsmen. We were delicate. We were fragile, but yet we were empowered and strong. And were
you introverted? Because I know you were saying, I read somewhere that Lee was very introverted, and the first time you met him, was it at Covent Garden Station or one of the early times?
Yeah,
and someone was bullying or teasing him or because of what he was wearing, and your instinct was to go and protect.
And I stood up for him. I was always like that. I still am, actually, with my friends. I was very protective, but I was. I went straight to his. It was the first time I met him, and I went straight to his defence and stuck up for him. And I was always like that. And I think that just comes from being bullied when I was much younger, and well, through my teens as well. And it's funny how he was the same, because when I look now at his work, and when I looked at the V&A exhibition, the Savage Beauty, you see such structure and such strength in everything that he did. And I see that in my work too. And I think there is this thing about empowering the person you design for. Like when I first designed the Tusk Earring, for example, when I did them for the Hunger Show in '96 from the Queen, I remember forming that long shape. I remember making it and just loving touching it. Because remember, by day, I was still working for the goldsmith company that
the traditional...
the traditional world. And I was making like chandelier earrings, beautiful, don't get me wrong, because I still make those things today. But when I was working for Lee and myself, it was more about this tactility and this empowerment and this strength. And I remember making this Tusk earring and feeling it, and it was so tactile and so simple and refined. But when I held it up to my ear, and it was long, they were big earrings, they were like this. And when I held up to my ear, there was this instant, my posture changed. I became empowered, and I thought, God, that is fierce. you know, that was a word in the 90s, you know, a bit naff now, but it was a word that was big in the 90s. And I just thought that fierce. And I felt goosebumps. I felt like no one would mess with me wearing that. There was this instant protection, but yet there was this intrigue and element of provoking. There was just, I just loved the juxtaposition of wearing something that was quite intriguing but empowering and reflected.
And that's it. Your pieces, they're unapologetic. You have, if you look at all the large international houses, they try and cater all things to all people. So they'll have the high jewelry and they'll have the access range and they'll have everything in between. And there'll be some smaller pieces and some larger pieces. But there isn't now, because it's not the eponymous brand anymore, there isn't that true DNA that's going through all of the collections. Whereas with you, it's Shaun. It's Shaun's brain, it's Shaun's mind, it's Shaun's history, it's Shaun's everything that we are seeing encapsulated in these pieces of jewelry. And they are so strikingly unapologetic and yet so feminine, so sensual, so... they're statement pieces. All of your pieces are statement pieces, and even the smaller pieces are still statement pieces. You look at the Aurora ring, and just the fact it's a ring, you know, it's not a massive, there's no huge stones involved, but just the fact that three of them mesh together, you can wear one individually, you can wear two, or you can wear all three, and it's that everything's a statement. Everything's a statement. Well, thank you. That's a lovely thing to say, and I'm really glad that you see that. And if you look at even, it's the simplicity as well. I think the strength is in the simplicity, like that Aurora ring that you're talking about. Even if you take one of the rings, you separate the three, you hold one, it is held, you know, the ring is holding the center stone, but there's a little point. There's a point in everything I do. Every little piece I make, there's a point. Even the earrings, the little studs, or even the little rose thorn. And the cherry blossom cuffs as well. You know, it's this sort of lovely, delicate, beautiful thing, but then it's ephemeral and it's something that's only there for such a short period of time, and then it dies and it disappears. But even there, you've woven in, it's like a gorse bush inside. Well, it's normally, like even if I take something that's really delicate and feminine and soft and softened by enamels or pearls, I want to make sure that the structure that they're on is formidable. So behind the flowers, behind that delicacy, the structure, the branch, the network that those things are decorated on is strong and powerful. It's, you know, like the rose corset I did from McQueen for Givenchy or Couture, that was a silver bodice. It was all solid silver, but there were slashes in it where blooms of roses came out. And it's kind of that balance of something so hard and so like armor, but yet within it there's this delicacy and this beauty and this softness. And I think that's in all of us. I think why naturally my work, because it is all natural really, how it's just so fluid. From the small pieces to the large, when I'm designing and making a piece of jewelry and with my team, this can be the smallest piece, it can be the silver piece, it can be a fine piece, it could be fine jewelry or high jewelry. They've all got to have the same energy and have that the little point is crucial. Everything's got the point, but it's got to have this little something just that says something about you. For example, you know, I use this as like, because it's me. So I can go to an evening event and I can wear a beautiful tailored suit. You know, men can just look like penguins sometimes, can't they? Just can repeat, right? So I can wear a beautiful tailored suit. The guy next to me is the same. He's got a lovely tailored suit on, blah, 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 blah. But I will have a little rose thorn stud earring in my ear. Tiny little rose thorn stud, with a little point. That makes me so much more different to the man next to me in
the tailored suit, because I'm wearing a very tailored suit, but that little point, that little sharp little piece of metal sticking out of my body is questioning. The onlookers look at him and go, okay,
it's a talking point, and your jewelry is always a talking point. And again, full disclosure, so my wife has a few of your pieces. Every time, without exception, when we go out, someone will say, oh, I love the earrings, oh, I love the bangle, oh, look at that earring. And it's that they're so different, they're talking points.
Well, I think for me it's like it's touching on an emotion and an identity of someone's personality, of who they are. Because jewelry, where I came from, where my training, I'll be honest, jewelry was about wealth and status. That was my early training. In the 80s and the 90s, the bigger the better. You know, it was about wealth, it was about grandiosity, it was all of those things. And there's nothing wrong with that. We crafted some amazing, beautiful, historic pieces of jewelry. But for me, jewelry is really about touching a part of the person, who they are, what they want to be, the energy they have, their persona. And that's why I love it so much. And I give it the same energy to every piece, small or large. And I suppose, like you kindly said, there is that handwriting all the way through, and it's so identifiable because it's not necessarily a signature style, it's an emotion. It's provoking in people, like
it goes so deeper, so much deeper.
And it's creating jewelry that is. I remember when I very first started doing my first collection. I set up the House of Shaun Leane in 1999, but I started my first collection in 96. And I used to go around all these jewellers with briefcases, like a proper travelling salesman, knocking on jewellers' doors, going, my name's Shaun and I work for a fashion designer, Alexander McQueen, and no one knew who he was then. And I said, I'm making this collection. And it was really fierce. It was Tusk earrings, it was sharp rings, it was rose thorns. Then I had them. And they thought I was mad. They said, no one will buy this jewelry. It's so sharp. Why would you make jewelry that's sharp and looks so aggressive? And I said, well, it's not aggressive. It's elements of nature and it's powerful. And they were like, no, you'll never sell this. And they knew of me because I was quite well known in Hatton Garden because I was a very good goldsmith. I had a good reputation. A lot of the big houses, wanted me to work for them. And they said, you make beautiful pieces. I know of your work. Why don't you go and make full eternity rings and tiaras and stop messing about with all this organic, sharp pieces? And I was like, I followed my vision and I followed my heart, and it was what I loved. And it was about creating jewelry that wasn't just classic. It was about the 21st century. It was about people of today, or my generation anyway. Because all my generation were wearing it. The people I was hanging around with loved it. Lee was wearing it. Everyone was wearing it. Kate was wearing it. And it just began from there. And I just stayed true to it and stayed true to my integrity and kept my handwriting and carried on. And thankfully and gratefully, I persevered and I never went off piste, and I stayed true to my vision. And the house is 21 years old today now, which is fantastic, 21 years later.
And now we've got the 21 pieces coming. So that leads us nicely into the final bit about Phillips. So we've just got a couple of minutes left of our hour. We'll just watch, let's watch this final video and then we'll do what's coming next for Phillips.
So these are pieces of the house.
I love this artwork as well.
Thank you. There you see all my natural inspiration.
Yeah.
Cherry blossom. Yeah, absolutely love that collection. The delicacy of the hook.
Beautiful. So we've got the pieces. So we got the 12 pieces coming. They're in New York now. They're flying to Hong Kong. So they're going to be here for almost a month, which is great. And we can show them here because Hong Kong is more open than a lot of places in the world. And then we've got some more pieces coming as well.
You have. I'm so excited. So we have. So hopefully we will do the retrospective exhibition next year. We will see how permitting the world will open up. But our goal was always to have, with Phillips and myself, was always to have a beautiful retrospective exhibition of my work, from McQueen to my bespoke pieces like the Daphne Guinness glove that we made would be there. And then showcasing these 21 pieces that really touch on every facet of my world, really, and my history, from heritage to quite classic to avant-garde to McQueen, but in fine high jewelry.
Magic, magic. And Heather John, I just saw your message about that neck piece. So the quill, the choker necklace. If you have a look on Phillips on the website, so phillips.com/flawless-Shaun-Leane. So phillips.com/Shaun Leane, and you'll find that the quill choker is absolutely stunning. So it's currently in New York, but about to fly to Hong Kong. We're right out of time, I think. So if anyone, do we have time for questions? Are there questions, or are we moving straight on? You're welcome.
I just wanted to say, Shaun and Paul, thank you so much. This has been the most beautiful and personal conversation. We can't thank you enough for being here today. And if we were all in the same room, there would be a standing ovation, because I know it touched so many of us. So thank you so very, very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
The pleasure is all ours.